So I'm going to chat a bit about what the shadow is and what projections are simply and clearly. I could probably start and end by saying that the shadow is the entirety of our subconscious. That is the clearest and simplest definition. And so this means that this is all of the material that we do not know about ourselves, so we're ignorant of. Or it could be material aspects of ourselves that we've repressed or sort of shut out due to stress and trauma. So, the popular conceptualization of shadow work is really only a small sliver of its possibility. The popular conceptualization of shadow work is that it is basically looking at all of the bad aspects of ourselves. Like, kind of, we associate darkness with trauma and with like negative things, with sort of our inner monstery selves within. As I mentioned, that is a part of what shadow work is. Uh, Shadow work involves accepting all aspects of ourselves. But shadow work is really anything that we have removed from our conscious awareness or we are not aware of regarding ourselves. Um, and that can range from incredibly what we might define as negative or trauma filled to actually incredibly positive, joyful things. And so let's take a step back for a moment. Picture yourself in wholeness. Basically, to be cheesy for a moment, a sort of luminous being of sorts. What happens through our development, basically as infants and early children, is that we discover what the world is like. We discover not only, kind of the physical developmental stages that we go through, learning to walk, learning to crawl, all of that sort of stuff, but we also significantly develop emotionally as well as spiritually. And so if during that time we grew up with absolute unconditional love, parents who were there for us or guardians who were there for us, that loved us no matter who we are, no matter what we were doing, that sort of stuff, we are likely to come through this stage fairly intact and convinced that the world is a safe place where we can have a certain degree of trust. If we go through that period of time with conditional love, we learn that we will be loved, but we will be loved more if we are like this or do this, or we will be loved less if we do this or are like this. Then that foundation is shaken a bit. And then we can go to, the complete negative experience of reality is that if we had parents that just had kids because they were societally expected to, they didn't really want kids. If we had parents that had their own trauma and had closed off hearts and were not capable of love, or what might be determined as attachment, if we had experienced a lack of safety, um, a feeling of being unloved, unwanted, not seen, not taken care of physically, emotionally, spiritually, then what will happen is that our conceptualization of reality will be quite negative. And from this, a substantial shadow will form. And so, even if we have a relatively healthy childhood, we will likely learn not only from our parents, but also when we go to school and, kind of that age of, 6 to 18, where, and even in college, where we're having those formative experiences where we learn not only what is going on with our parents and if they will accept us, if we feel like we belong. But also, we will go through, further experiences of if our peers accept us, if we fit in, if we belong, if we experience trauma or stress as a result of who we are in an attempt to fit into our educational institutions or any stress, pressure, issues that arise there. What happens during all of these scenarios is that we come out of that state of wholeness. We start rejecting and repressing and pushing away parts of ourselves that we feel are not okay, are not lovable, are not wanted, are not, do not belong, are not cared for. And so a lot of times people think shadow work is this like traumatic, negative stuff. And it certainly has that aspect to it. But how many kids have repressed their joy, their curiosity, their light, their spiritual gifts, their, abilities, even their genius? I work with a lot of times um, highly intelligent and sensitive people that have repressed all of those things, either because of the reaction of their parents trying to fit into their household, or because they went into school and, experienced that the other kids didn't notice this or, didn't think like this. And there was a need to shut down those aspects of self because the thought would be that those parts of self are wrong or incorrect. And so let's add another layer on top of this. When we experience significant stress or trauma, and what may be traumatizing to one person may not be traumatizing to the next. But what happens energetically and spiritually is that and part of our consciousness sort of gets stuck. It stagnates. It stagnates in its development. It also stagnates kind of in that time and place. And so what happens is that we need to move forward. And so what happens over time is that we have all these bits of consciousness that we sort of have walled off or left behind or rejected because we either needed to disown them to fit in, to find approval, to find love, um, or because the trauma was too much for us to process at the time, and so we walled it off, or because the trauma or stress we were experiencing was again too much for us to overcome. We didn't have the appropriate support. We didn't have the appropriate physical, emotional, spiritual guidance to come out of that situation intact. Our consciousness, all of it moving forward. And so we leave aspects of ourselves behind. And so the simple term for this is inner children. And so most of us, by the time that we reach adulthood, we have all of these parts that are sort of stagnated in the past, all of these inner children that have separated from the whole. And we have all of these aspects of our being, aspects of our personality, of who we are that we have hidden from, that we have repressed or denied, in order to sort of make it through, in order to be accepted, to be approved of by the world, by our parents, and all of that sort of stuff. So, one of my favorite poets who talks about the shadow is Robert Bly. He talks about the long bag we drag behind us. And so that was one of the first images that really struck me about the shadow is that by the time we reach adulthood, we have so many parts of ourselves that we have made shadow, either out of all of it out of necessity, all of it out of a survival mechanism. because we either needed to move forward, even though part of us was still stuck in that trauma, or because we needed to fit in with our tribe, with our family, with our school system, with our peer group. And so, what is shadow work? What are the benefits of it? I really wish that I had found shadow work a bit sooner in my path. Maybe I wouldn't have been ready for it. I certainly read about it, about a decade before I started, heavily, heavily doing it. But shadow work is one of the most direct paths that there is to self-realization. It is an incredible path for healing. It is an incredible path for any type of self-work, spiritual, emotional, even if you're looking to do, magical, spiritual, other forms of body work, whatever your sort of thing is, shadow work is helpful because it brings you closer and closer to that state of wholeness. I will introduce my book. This is my latest book, Shadow Work for the Soul. It talks about all the stuff I'm talking about and more. And all of my books are filled with all of the sorts of, exercises and, that sort of stuff that you would need to actually do this work. I always, as an aside, I always hated when I was younger and I was reading through all these books and they talked about a technique and then they were like, um, for more, I'm not actually going to teach you anything about the technique. I'm just going to tell you how awesome it is. So I certainly share a lot of techniques in the book. The first aspect of shadow work that I really suggest that people do is emotional regulation, emotional intelligence exercises. Again, they're in the book, but a big part of our shadow is our inability to sit with and feel our emotions in an embodied way. If we learn the skills to be able to do this, our work with inner children can be so much more fruitful because what we were overwhelmed by when we were 6, when we were 15, or when we were 25 is not, first of all, it's not naturally going to be as overwhelming as it is to us today. But also, if we develop skills to work with our emotions, we have that as an added bonus of knowing how to work with our emotions in a safe and skilled way so they no longer feel overwhelming. And so we can feel them bit by bit rather than having a sort of floodgate open. And then we get into personal shadow work. I might do another video on what collective shadows are because that's its own like sort of um, um, bundle of things to chat about. And it's quite interesting in the world today because we are a world that is definitely has the dark feminine that has the darkest aspects of the shadow sort of presenting themselves, which is an excellent time to do shadow work because these energies are already engaged and showing themselves on a collective level. But there are two aspects to personal shadow work that are helpful to know about. The first is inner children work. And this work is done in a variety of different ways, but essentially it is going back to all of those aspects of stagnated consciousness, all of those inner children that are sort of locked in time, locked in development, and helping them to heal, to be seen, to be heard, to process whatever emotions or experiences they have with you as an adult. Um, a lot of times, our needs for healing as an adult and our needs for healing as inner children are very much the same, except as inner children, they often need a lot more hand holding and the presence of you as an adult self there can make all the difference because you are there with them. They are not alone in their suffering anymore. The other aspect of shadow work that is so enormously helpful to know about is projections. So the real question is, what happens to our energy when we repress it, when we deny it, when we can't have it being a part of our conscious awareness? Well, the main thing that we do is that we sort of shove it down within our tissues, within ourselves, and then we project it onto others. And we don't recognize that we are doing this. But this is a basic energetic mechanism that we do. And so all of our subconscious material, every aspect of ourselves that we are ignorant of, that we have not claimed within ourselves, we push that onto other people. And there's a good reason for this. Ideally, we'd be able to see this in other people, to question why we are so bothered or irritated or triggered by somebody, to really sit with it and to heal it, to heal the reasoning for that through awareness, through recognition, through the other emotional and inner children sort of work that is present. Um, but we have lost a lot of the skills for how to do this. And so I love teaching people those skills and bringing them into a state of awareness where they can start to notice that what bothers them in other people is unclaimed stuff within themselves. And so when we are willing to come into that awareness, we can heal quite a bit. We can notice so much stuff that we've kind of pushed out of conscious awareness. And this is significant because the stuff that we really push out of conscious awareness, that we've repressed, denied, that we shove onto other people, is the stuff that's kind of the big fish, so to speak. We might be aware of some aspect of it or a little bit of it, but when we can truly see it in another person, we will become aware of kind of the big fish, our biggest needs for healing, our biggest reasons that we have come out of wholeness, the parts of ourselves that have been sort of stagnated or stuck in development. And we can start to reclaim them, start to move back into our wholeness. With just that awareness is enough. But there certainly are taking that awareness, taking the patterns that we notice, not just in one person, but several people, and sitting with it and doing shadow work with it is an extraordinary thing to do. And again, is tackling those big fish, those things that we are not aware of regarding ourselves. And so I will say one last thing before I end, which is that, again, popular culture is sort of misconstrued shadow work as just being about the negative aspects of ourselves. There is extraordinary healing work that can be done, extraordinary self-awareness, self-actualization work that can be done with that part of shadow work. But what we have also done over the years is hidden, we have dimmed our own light, we have stopped up our own voices, we have, stopped our genius, our intellect, our creative capacity, our spiritual capacity, all of these, our beauty, all of these wonderful, lovely aspects of ourselves. And those are called shadows of light. At least I call them that in the book. But and that is a recognition that shadow work is more than just about healing trauma or healing inner children. That certainly is a big part of it. But it is also about reclaiming the light aspects of ourselves, reclaiming the parts of ourselves that perhaps in childhood we were told were too much, or that people were jealous of, or we just went into a school environment and we learned that being good at what we were naturally inclined towards wasn't okay. It made us stand out from the rest, or was made fun of, or just simply wasn't what the other kids were interested in. So I will say that the book goes into a lot more than what I talked about. There are a lot of other aspects to shadow work, including talking about loops, which are the repeated patterns that we go through, repeated conversations. All of those things can point us to our shadows. Also talks about collective shadows. The last thing that I will mention, and it depends on when you're viewing this, but as many of you have known, I've been teaching for a long period of time, um, a little over 20 years by this point, actually. And I taught a shadow work course last year, and I will be teaching a shadow work course starting in January 2025. So if you're viewing this, whenever you're viewing it and you're interested, look at my course page because I may have a shadow work course coming up that not only teaches how to do shadow work, but it is one of the courses that I'm offering where I offer personalized, guidance, one-on-one guidance, either through social media, Facebook group, or via email. So I will put that in the description below if any of you are interested. If you are not, be well. I hope that you gathered something uh, from this discussion about shadow work.